And there's a lot of us who believe Islamophobia is a form of racism. It's in that family of racism and family of bigotry that includes racism. There's a reason why Sikhs and turbans are attacked and confused for Muslims. People have a stereotype of what a Muslim looks like. So we're keen to stress that part of Islamophobia. But isn't the problem that for a lot of Muslims, especially in North America, they haven't really been involved in other anti-racist struggles? You don't hear many Muslim imams or leaders talking about Black Lives Matter or talking about standing in solidarity with Latinos who are facing all sorts of persecution, probably work as bad as Muslims are going to face under a Trump administration. Has that been a mistake that Muslims were gone AWOL during some of these anti-racist struggles?
Well, I think I grew up in the civil rights period. My mother was a civil rights activist, a very serious one. Like that became her life. And she was an early. She started in the late 50s. So I grew up in that environment. One of the things that I think we need to be reminded of is that the United States is probably, in terms of its laws, one of the least racist societies in the world. We have some of the best anti-discriminatory laws on the planet. That racism, the idea of superiority, there's really not a word in Arabic for racism, which I find very fascinating. There's modern words for it, like ansariya, but these aren't real words in terms of classical 7th century Arabic. Well, hold on, I know. So one of the things that the Arabs understood is they called it ignorance. It's jahl. And the beauty of identifying it as bigotry or ignorance is that ignorance is not essential to a human being. In logic, you would call it an accident. And accidents can be removed, right? A lot of people have been reconstructed in the United States, and I think it's very dangerous if this constant label is applied to people. Leopard spots fade, but they don't change. You can recreate something, this white lash. You can recreate a type of world in a lot of people that was very different. And I think allow people to grow, recognize, people.
But if there are struggles going on,
yeah.
If there's, for example, struggles in the United States against black people being shot by the police, or in Canada on behalf of indigenous people,
but a lot of
shouldn't Muslim communities be part
a lot of the
struggles?
a lot of the problems in the United States with the black community being shot by the police, we have about 15,000, between 15 and 18,000 homicides a year. 50% are black on black crime. Right, literally 50%.
Okay, but you're not defending the treatment of unarmed black people by the police.
No, you can't. An unarmed black person being shot, or a white, there are twice as many whites that have been shot by police, but nobody ever shows those videos. It's the assumption is the police are racist, and it's not always.
Assumption. We saw it in Ferguson.
It's not
we've
always
seen
the case.
Emails. We've seen
it's
the
not
documents.
always the case, and I think it's very dangerous again to just broad stroke any police now that shoots a black is immediately considered a racist, and sometimes these are African American police officers.
We don't have time to get into a whole debate about
that.
Well,
I mean, it's an important debate though, because I think, we can't. The police aren't all racist.
But no one's saying they're all racist. I'm saying when there are legitimate anti-racist struggles going on, civil rights for people, people's rights not to be incarcerated wrongly or disproportionately or shot without when there's no whatever the struggles are. If we take a step back, since we're not going to agree on the specifics, shouldn't Muslim communities be part of those wider struggles against racism, against other communities, if we want people to stand with us against Islamophobia?
We should all be against any ideologies of superiority of one people over another people. It's completely antithetical to our religion, but we have some of the worst racism in our own community.
Oh, you beat me to my next question.
Yeah, we have some of the worst racism in our own community. The anti-Jewish rhetoric that you hear in the Islamic community is horrific. And one of the things about Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, who's an Arab Sheikh, I've never, in the over 20 years I've known him, I've never heard him say a bad word about Jewish people ever. And yet I've heard in our community so many blatant remarks. Also, do you know what it's like to be a Pakistani in a lot of the Gulf states, or an Indian, or from Kerala, even worse? Do you know? People talk about white privilege. What about What about Arab privilege over non-Arabs in the Middle East? I mean, I just feel like we have so little moral capital at pointing our fingers at other people, and it actually makes me a little sick to my stomach when I see all these people rising up about this anti this, that, or the other, white privilege and all these things, and it's like our community is rife with these things, and our religion is so profoundly. We have to, by practicing Islam, that would be a good start.
So on this specific issue of religion, one thing, when we talk about Islamophobia, I'm always amused by the fact that the Islamophobe who we talk about.
Let me just give you one example. You know, Safiya. She's the Jewish wife of the Prophet ﷺ, who was accused of being a Jew even after the Prophet died, because she used to visit her relatives on the Sabbath, right? Safiya, somebody called her Bint al-Yahudi, and the Prophet said to her, go tell him that your uncle is Harun, your grandfather's Harun, your uncle is Moses, and that your husband's Muhammad. You know, in other words, it's something to be proud of. It's not something to be ashamed of.
We talk about division, so there's certainly racism within the community, has to be tackled. And obviously there's rising sectarianism, many would argue, coming out of the Middle East, coming out of the conflicts in the Middle East. Some are worried that it's being imported into communities here. How can you be struggling against Islamophobia when you have divisions within the community? In fact, I'm always amused how an Islamophobe who attacks a woman in the street, a hijabi woman, doesn't ask if she's Sunni or Shia before he tries to pull her hijab off. Well, we're obsessed with these titles and labels. What would you do to try and tackle, or how bad, first of all, do you think the problem is of sectarianism now in 2016? And what do you do to tackle it in Muslim communities in places like North America?
Well, I think right now Muslims should recognize that we're all in this together, and what's happening around the globe is very serious, because the people forget history.